Hexapods are insects and relatives of insects. More species within this group than there is in any other group. They live in almost every terrestrial habitat in fresh water, and in fresh water, I'm sorry. So they're all over the place. I mean, you can find bugs pretty much anywhere. The internal anatomy of an insect includes several complex organ systems. They're actually very complex for being as small of a package as. Here's a look at a grasshopper. Cerebral ganglion, that's kind of a pretty highly evolved brain structure. To this point, we've seen basically a mangled mess of nerves, but we actually find a brain structure in these sorts of animals here. Crop, used for breaking down food. We have mouth parts for feeding itself. Tracheal tubes, it breathes through the exoskeleton. There's these little pores that gas comes in, and the tracheal tubes will take that oxygen and all those gases to the blood system, and it does have kind of a primitive circulatory system where it will actually move blood the length of its body, and that's what's going to mix with the tracheal tubes. Let's see, what else? I don't know. Relatively complex for its size is basically what it comes down to. So kind of a cool thing. Flight is one key to the great success of insects. Their ability to fly, evade predators, find food. Those are all huge advantageous characteristics that insects have, and has allowed them to be so successful. Crawling and spending all their time on the ground would, decrease their survivability because there's other predators there, and they would lack the ability to escape. They can't move that quickly. Being able to fly gives them kind of a fighting chance. Huge thing. Many insects undergo metamorphosis during their development. In incomplete metamorphosis, the young, called the nymphs, resemble adults but are smaller and go through a series of molts until they reach full size. So they can start as a larval stage, which is essentially a grub, and that grub will go through incomplete metamorphosis to the point where they're called nymphs. And from that nymph stage, they'll go through many less dramatic changes until they arrive at the final structures of the adult. Insects with complete metamorphosis have larval stages known by such name as maggot, grub, or caterpillar. So we have these larval stages that are rather pronounced. Larval stage looks entirely different from the adult stage. This would be an example. Obviously, you see caterpillar. This would eventually turn into obviously a butterfly, a monarch butterfly. This is the monarch caterpillar. This is the chrysalis, or the cocoon. In the case of butterflies, referred to as chrysalis. Here's the later stage of development. Inside here, you can actually even see the beginnings of wings. It'll eventually get so thin that you can actually see the animal in its entirety in there. Kind of interesting, which we see right here. We can see those wings kind of changing and becoming more defined and more colorful as that chrysalis and cocoon are getting thinner and thinner. Eventually, it'll reach a stage where it just kind of bursts out. Needs to dry off its wings, and then it can carry on with its life. Most insects have separate male and females and reproduce sexually. So there's very little asexual reproduction that happens in the world of insects. Individuals find and recognize members of their own species by bright colors, sound, and odors. Obviously, coloration is going to be huge. Cicadas, if we talk about in the case of sound, that's going to be big. Odors, lots of different bugs produce all kinds of different pheromones and odors so that they can recognize and find a mate. Some insects are beneficial as pollinators, such as bees, while others are harmful as carriers of disease or pests of crops. Things like ticks would be an example of something that carries disease, obviously. Pests of crops, certain types of beetles will knock out a crop, all kinds of different things. Insects are classified into more than 30 orders, so it's a very diverse group, I guess you could say. While arachnids and insects thrive on land, crustaceans for the most part have remained in marine and freshwater environments. Their body plans are actually pretty similar to one another as far as insects versus crustaceans, but some of the key differences are the multiple body segments. Mostly in the world of insects, we're at about 3 body parts or body segments. In the case of crustaceans, they're highly segmented still. They have 3 major regions of the body, but you're going to find more segments, predominantly in the tail region, in many of these animals. So crustaceans, or subphylum Crustaceae, typically have branched appendages that are extensively specialized for feeding and locomotion. So they have, those claws obviously is what we would think of with crustaceans. Most crustaceans have separate male and females and produce sexually. We'll see that. Isopods, those are little pill bugs, potato bugs, or whatever you guys call them. Include terrestrial, freshwater, and marine species. The pill bugs are probably the more well-known of these isopods. Find them under a rock. You lift up a rock, you find these little potato bugs, they scurry away. Decapods are all relatively large crustaceans, including lobsters, crabs, crayfish, and shrimp. The deca meaning 10, pods meaning legs, so they presumably have 10 legs. Here's what we got. Ghost crab. They call it a ghost crab, kind of because of the color, but also they, when you see them on the beach, usually they're standing right outside of a hole, and if you go near them, they seem to disappear as they just kind of fall into their hole, and then their hole is usually covered up relatively quickly, so you can't really see where they went. So watching ghost crabs, you can look up videos on YouTube. They're actually pretty cool. So that's an example. Planktonic crustaceans include many species of copepods, which are among the most numerous of all animals. So they are very, very, very small, and they school up in these huge, gigantic groups. So probably the most numerous of all the animals. There's a huge population of them, and they're kind of the basis of the food pyramid or the food chain within oceanic and freshwater environments. They're a major food source for even the largest of animals, such as whale sharks and so on. Here's krill. Krill would be an example. Very, very tiny. Barnacles are a group of mostly sessile crustaceans.